Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about nonfiction books. Now, I do read nonfiction, but I don't read a lot of it. Probably at most, I would read like one nonfiction a month or like a nonfiction every other month. I don't read it very often, so I don't really talk about it a lot on my channel. But usually when I end up reading nonfiction books, I usually love them because they're either about topics that I'm really interested in, or they're about people that I really admire. Like I read a lot of memoirs of people that I'm really interested in or that I really love. So usually when I read nonfiction, it turns out to be very good for me. So I should probably read more, right? Anyway, enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Oh, and by the way, that's what the stack of books is here. It's all my nonfiction books I have to talk about. And of course, with me being a Stephen King fan, I will of course talk about On Writing, which is half memoir and half writing advice. This one's really good. I actually like it more so because of the memoir. I think if I remember correctly, the first half of this is just talking about his childhood and him growing up and then him eventually becoming a writer and then him dealing with the accident. And it's so good. And then, the second half is writing advice, which I did really like when I was like writing. I used to write a bunch of short stories and I still do occasionally. So that advice helped me a lot and it's helped a lot of people since the book has come out. It's definitely a Stephen King book that even non-Stephen King fans can appreciate. And yeah, it's one of my favorite nonfiction books. And yeah, got to include King, right? For those of you who don't know, I actually have a bachelor's degree in psychology, although I don't ever use it because I am a mailman. But I did go to school because I was interested in psychology. And I took a lot of great classes, and I've read a lot of really interesting psychology books, including, if I can pick it up here, Switching Time by Richard Baer. And if you can read the subtitle, it's a doctor's harrowing story of, it's really hard to read it backwards, a doctor's harrowing story of treating a woman with 17 personalities. And it's essentially about a woman with dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, but they changed it. And it's basically this doctor's recount of this woman, like treating this woman who's just so far into her personalities, and her personalities have kind of taken over her life. It was very interesting to read how he helped her get over it. And I don't know if it's necessarily true or not, because some things like Sybil came out later on after it was released and it was revealed like, oh, it wasn't as bad as they were portraying it. But the way it was written, it seems like it was real, and it was just very gripping. I read this book in one sitting. I had to know what was going to happen. And yeah, that's one of the best psychology books I've ever read. One of my favorite actors of all time is Danny Trejo, and I actually recently, I think at the tail end of last year, I read his memoir, simply titled Trejo, and it was very good. This guy has been through some shit. Like he started out in life like at a very low spot of just like on drugs and just constantly in jail. And, it's the story of how he turned his life around, became an actor, became, a multimillionaire, and, is in these big time movies. And he's just a very interesting guy. He's just a lot of life lessons you can learn from the book, and just like I said, this guy's been through some shit, and there's some really just messed up and funny stories in here. I had a really good time, and he narrated the audiobook, which was a lot of fun. And yeah, Danny Trejo, I had a really good time reading this one. Speaking of memoirs written by actors, I almost forgot to include this book, which I actually recently just finished, and that would be Bob Odenkirk's comedy drama. And of course, written by Bob Odenkirk, who you might recognize as playing Saul Goodman on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, two shows that I would easily put in my top 10 favorite shows of all time. And this book was just very fun. I listened to the audio where Bob himself narrated, getting his early life and just his early years in comedy, and then obviously drama with Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. This book was just a lot of fun, very funny, and yeah, definitely one of my favorite nonfiction books that I've ever read. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of memoirs, especially when it comes to music. So I have 5 musical memoirs, biographies to show y'all today. One of them would be Dave Grohl, the Storyteller, which I read in December, I believe. I really enjoyed this one. It wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. I wanted him to go into more detail about, the music that he's played throughout his career. It's not really about that. Like, it's called The Storyteller. So he tells stories, about his life that aren't necessarily about the music. I really wanted him to go into more detail about like his time with Nirvana. And he really only spent like a chapter on that. And then obviously the Foo Fighters. But then there's also these other groups that he's been a part of, like them Crooked Vultures and Queens of the Stone Age. He didn't really expound on that too much. But one aspect of this that I did like is him getting to meet a bunch of his musical heroes, which was really fun. Like he met Iggy Pop, and like he met Elton John. There's other ones that I can't remember off the top of my head, but like that part of the book was really cool. And again, narrated by Dave Grohl. Had a fun time listening to it. I won't say it's my favorite, but I still had a really good time listening to Dave Grohl's The Storyteller. A fun memoir that I read this year was Flea Acid for the Children. If you don't know, Flea is the bassist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, one of my all-time favorite bands. I love them. I've loved them since I was a kid. Not a very flattering photo, but it does make sense because this book, while it was good, it wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. Because basically all of the book is about his childhood and his young adult years before he joined the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And at the end of the book, it's implied that he's going to write a second book like about his time with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I felt kind of duped. I was like, oh, man, I wanted to read about Red Hot Chili Peppers. But there's a lot of really just fun and just outrageous stories in this book. And again, narrated by Flea himself. And it was a lot of fun. You get like a lot of little vignettes about his life. There's like over 100 chapters and just numerous stories of just craziness and just, yeah, I had a really good time with this one. Again, not one of my absolute favorites, but I had a great time with it. These next 3 musical memoirs are probably my all-time favorites. I would give all of these 5 stars, and one of them would be Me by Elton John. Elton John, top 5 artist for me all time, and I love getting his memoir, especially at, the tender age of, 70 something when he wrote this. So you get his whole life story, and it's really good. And he does go into his music, and he also goes into all of the trials and trepidations he went through, and just his life is just very interesting. It's everything that I want in a musical memoir. I want his upbringing, and I want, like his introduction to fame and like the music that he was writing, and then all of the struggles he had to go through. and just all the way up until where he is now. And it was perfect, really. I gave it 5 stars. I even loved the audiobook, which wasn't narrated by Elton John. It was narrated by the guy who played him in the movie, which I still need to watch. I can't believe I still haven't watched the damn movie yet. It's called Rocket Man, I think. I really need to watch it, but the book was great, and I'll probably reread it sometime in the future. Yeah, it was really good. One of my absolute favorites. Also, another one of my favorite rock memoirs is Hard to Handle by Steve Gorman, who is the drummer for another one of my favorite bands, the Black Crowes. And of course, me being a drummer, I love getting a drummer's perspective on a band. And this one was especially good for me because you get a lot of musical detail about how he recorded the drums and like his decisions on certain songs. Like he went into detail about like every album and like all the songs that he recorded, and I was tickled pink with that because like there's one of their best songs is Remedy, and he talked about like, oh, normally, you know, for the verse you would play on the hi-hat, and then for the chorus you would go to the ride cymbal, but he reversed it. And you know, I was like, oh yeah, he does do that. And so a lot of fun detail with that. But then of course, if you know the history of the Black Crowes, there's a lot of drama because of the singer and the guitarist who are brothers, and they're just constantly fighting. And so there's a lot of band drama, which is also a lot of fun to read about. And just the stuff that they got to do when they were a band, like them touring with the Rolling Stones and then touring with Jimmy Page. Just a lot of fun stuff in this book. Definitely one of my all-time favorite rock memoirs. And then we get to probably my favorite musical nonfiction book, which would, of course, be Beast, which is John Bonham's biography, which, of course, John Bonham being my all-time favorite drummer for my all-time favorite band. I knew already before I even read the book that I was going to love it and give it 5 stars, which I did. And, of course, with John Bonham and Led Zeppelin being my all-time favorites, I, of course, knew a lot about the stuff that was already in the book, but there was some really cool stuff that I didn't know that I learned from reading this book, which is always a plus. And of course, with it being a biography, you get him from his upbringing all the way to the formation of Led Zeppelin, all the way to the height of Led Zeppelin, and then sadly to his passing. I enjoyed every single minute of this book, which of course makes sense. You know, John Bonham, like, you know, anything John Bonham related, I'm going to love, right? So definitely my favorite musical nonfiction book ever. All right, and for the second half of this video, I want to talk about some nonfiction books that I'm excited to get to, books that I haven't read yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to love. And speaking of Led Zeppelin, Patrick was kind enough to send me this book, which is Led Zeppelin biography. It's a thick one. I think it's like 600 pages, and there's definitely going to be some stuff that I already know, but I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more about my favorite band. So, of course, I'm excited for that. And then also a book that I've read a little bit of it, but I haven't had time to, you know, read all of it because it is massive. It would be Led Zeppelin, All the Songs. And literally, it's a beast of a book. And literally, it just goes through all of their albums. And just song by song, it goes through like how they made the song, how they recorded the song, what the song was about, you know, all of that good stuff. And it's all the songs. So it's like 70, 80 songs. And yeah, I've read through a little bit of it, but like I said, it's a chunker. I haven't had time to read all of it, but I'll chug along with it. And yeah. And then also, speaking of all the songs, I had the same thing for another one of my favorite bands, Pink Floyd, All the Songs, which that's a pretty cool cover, right? And yeah, it's the same thing, like all the songs, like how they were made, when they recorded it, what they wrote it about. So those two ones I'm going to have a very good time with when I get to them. Also, another musical biography I really want to get to is Eruption, which of course is about one of the best guitar players of all time, Eddie Van Halen. And yeah, sadly, he passed away a few years ago, so it'll be fun to learn more about him. And like I said, I am interested in psychology, even though I don't do that as a career anymore. It's still fun to read about. And one of the last books that I got for Book of the Month before I canceled my subscription was Bittersweet by Susan Cain. And you might recognize that name because she wrote a book called Quiet, which was all about the power of introverts. And I definitely recognize myself as an introvert, definitely not an extrovert. And usually, it feels like the world kind of rewards people for being extroverted when really they should, at some points in life, do the opposite. Like embrace introversion. Is that a word? Embrace being introverted. And she wrote that book, which was very empowering. This book is about how sorrow and longing make us whole, which is, of course, a very important and interesting topic to me. So I don't know when I'll be able to read it, but I will eventually get to it. And then the last two I'll mention here are memoirs that are very, very, very popular that I'm super late to the party with, but I will eventually read them. One of them is Michelle Obama's Becoming. A lot of people love this book, and I've had it for a while now, and I have never gotten to it, so I will eventually remedy that. And then the same thing with Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I've heard basically nothing but great things about this book. I heard it's very heart-wrenching and disturbing at times, but I'm still very interested in reading it, so I need to get to these two books eventually. But yeah, those are some of the nonfiction books that I'm really looking forward to reading. All right, so what did you guys think of this video? What do you guys think of my picks for my favorite nonfiction books? And of course, leave your comments down below about what your favorite nonfiction books are. And of the nonfiction books that I showed y'all that I'm interested in reading, please let me know which ones you think I should prioritize. Leave all of those great comments down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Book Astronomer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me financially, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching and have a terrific day.